The film, based on real events, begins in Germany on May 7, 1945. The Great Patriotic War is coming to an end. A detachment of Allied American troops spots a German command vehicle among a column of civilian refugees and stops it. Inside, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring and his family. Seeing the soldiers, Göring orders the driver to throw out the white flag as a sign of surrender. In the United States, Judge Robert Jackson was told that Göring, the country's first citizen since Hitler's death, had been arrested. Because senior officials in Nazi Germany want to bring the case to trial, Jackson is asked to preside over the event. He doubts that the scale of the process is expected to be unprecedented, but in the end he agrees to participate in the International Tribunal, where in addition to the United States, France, Great Britain, and the USSR will be prosecutors. Military psychiatrist Douglas Kelly went to the city of Mondorf by train. Along the way, while entertaining himself with magic tricks, he meets journalist Lila. At the station, the doctor is met by Sergeant Trist, who takes the psychiatrist to Colonel Andrus, who is responsible for maintaining the top of the Nazi regime. Douglas was brought in to conduct expert evaluations of prisoners, including Hermann Göring, before they were brought to trial. The psychiatrist learns that the prisoner is taking 40 pills a day, but learns through experience that these are strong opiate painkillers, essentially drugs. Trist, acting as a translator, takes the doctor to the Nazis to introduce them. During a short conversation, Douglas learns that Göring understands English, which he notes to the sergeant on the way out. Suspecting him as an intelligent and cunning narcissist, the only one of all the prisoners who manages to avoid conviction, the psychiatrist decides to find out the identity of the Reichsmarschall, for which he goes to the local library in the middle of the night and rummages through it in search of books praising the patient. Returned to the prisoner in the morning, he learns that Göring suffocated due to refusal of pills, but Douglas manages to reason with him with the help of charm and persuasion. The next day, he gives the German prisoners Rorschach tests, the ones with the ink blots. Unlike his colleagues, Herring directly notes that he finds only spots without any associations, skillfully avoiding a potential diagnosis. In the United States, Judge Jackson, in order to achieve the legitimacy of the upcoming trial, is trying to convince world authorities of this. He turned to the head of the Catholic Church, the Pope, for help, forcing him to accept allies. Otherwise, Catholics around the world will be remembered as Nazi collaborators because the Vatican recognized their rule as one of the first countries in the world. Göring, along with other prisoners, was airlifted to Nuremberg, where the trial was to take place. On the way, Douglas, at the request of the patient, entertained him with magic tricks. In response, Göring promises to show a much more remarkable trick. He will avoid the death penalty. Upon arrival, the Nazis are assigned to prison cells, and Colonel Andrus personally explains that they will be watched from ear to ear. The psychiatrist visits Göring in his cell to continue the conversation. The doctor was obsessed with the idea of writing a book based on these conversations. Jackson also comes to town. While inspecting upcoming court hearing, he meets David Maxwell V, the British representative in this process. Pett warns his American colleague that the case must be won. Otherwise, everything could turn into a rehabilitation of Nazism. To find the key to Göring's psychology, Douglas decides to play on his ego and seek help from a serious patient, Rudolf Hess. Having flown to Britain in 1941 to negotiate an alliance with Germany and the collaborators there, Hess was captured by the British, where he feigned amnesia. Then, having admitted that he had faked the first amnesia, he began to fake the second. Now that he had been transported from England to Nuremberg, the psychiatrist could not say with certainty that Hess was of sound mind. To split it, the help of a party comrade was needed. Having built trust, Douglas tracked down Göring's wife and daughter to deliver them letters from prison. Having found the patient's family, he poses as a friend of the Reichsmarschall and grabs the reply letters. When he and the sergeant return to the prison building, it is full of journalists. International lawyers prosecute prisoners. Jackson learned from his aide that the Nazi defense strategy would include justifying the invasion of Denmark and Norway on the grounds that Britain had previously wanted to occupy these neutral countries as donations for military bases. Five confirmed that such plans actually took place, but the Nazis overtook the crown. And this placement now removes one lever of pressure. To find out what can be pressed in the case of Göring, the most important man of the remaining Nazis, the judge meets with Dr. Douglas at night in the square, where 10 years ago Hitler announced the adoption of the Nuremberg racial laws directed against the Jews. A lawyer turns to a psychiatrist for help to figure out how to defeat a cunning and cold-blooded German in court. Talking to the prisoner about Hitler, Douglas realizes that he admires the Führer. He later told his lawyers that Göring had the following position regarding concentration camps. Imagine them as labor camps. The doctor hints that the legal basis for the charges against the winners is bursting at the seams, and such a seasoned narcissist and a born psychologist as Göring will easily convince the entire court that he is not so guilty. The situation worsened when, despite all precautions, Robert Ley, the Führer SS Obergruppen, decided not to wait for trial, was found dead in his cell. Suspecting that Douglas sympathized with Göring, a partner was imposed on him in the person of Dr. Gilbert to more accurately characterize the prisoners. Gilbert first invites his colleague to become a co-author of the book for which he is collecting material. However, the chance to become famous as a Nazi psychotherapist doesn't come along every day. But Douglas politely refuses, pretending that he does not have the book. He himself continued to visit Göring's wife and daughter, conveying a message from them to the prisoner. An increasingly friendly and trusting relationship develops between him and the patient. Douglas even teaches the Nazi a simple magic trick, which impresses his daughter. The Reichsmarschall optimistically hopes to impress the girl in person when he is released. The German also encourages the doctor, saying that he can surpass his father, a simple laborer satisfied with his craft, and go down in history. Douglas's enthusiasm is not dampened even by Sergeant 300's comments that he is too in tune with the prisoner's worldview. However, he submits to the Jackson court a draft statement that Göring will read at the Nuremberg trials. The hearing of the case is scheduled for the next day. In the morning, the Reichsmarschall makes a speech to his Nazi and prison colleagues, urging them to hold out until the thaw. In the courtroom, everything is ready for the trial. Microphones are placed near the speakers. Headphones are set for simultaneous interpretation, and movie cameras are set to record the most famous case of the century. Colonel Andrus, with a small group of aides, including Douglas, led the Nazis through a specially constructed wooden tunnel from the prison building to the meeting room. Under camera flashes, the accused take their places. At the command, "Get up," judgment is approaching. Göring sits until the last, becoming the last, thereby emphasizing his exclusivity among those gathered. Judge Jackson took the floor first, speaking on behalf of the prosecution and calling for a fair trial to ensure that the horrors of the Nazi regime are not repeated in the future. Defendants are then asked to plead guilty or not guilty. Göring begins to make a speech, but the presiding judge interrupts him. The Reichsmarschall admits his guilt. After the meeting, Douglas goes to Göring's family, where he learns that they were arrested by the Americans. He breaks into Colonel Andrus' house in the middle of the night to demand clemency from the civilians. But even after a phone call, nothing can be done here. The decision is made from above. However, the doctor decides not to tell Hermann that his family has been arrested. But Dr. Gilbert soon reveals the deception, leading to a battle between psychiatrists to brainwash their allies. At the next meeting, participants were shown a documentary film about the horrors of the concentration camps, based on archival footage filmed by soldiers in the last days of the war. The black and white film depicts emaciated, starving survivors and piles of corpses being executed by SS guards. There's so many dead that an excavator had to be used to clear the rubble. After the meeting, Douglas, having seen the light of what he saw, visits Göring in his cell. He continues to insist that he knows nothing, comparing the atrocities of his countrymen to the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which killed 150,000 civilians in one day. The psychiatrist denies that it is anything else. American planes bombed military factories, which, by an absurd coincidence, were located in a residential city. After losing his temper and finally arguing with the patient, the doctor announces that he will be hanged and plans to express his sadness in the pub. There he meets Lila, succumbing to her feminine charms. Drunk and upset, Douglas reveals secret information about what he was doing here. In the morning, his story, as told by a journalist, hits the front pages of the newspapers. Colonel Andrus, having read the report of the abuse, releases Douglas and orders him to return home. The psychiatrist goes to the station, where he meets Sergeant Trist. He admits that he knows German, since he lived almost his entire life in Germany, being an atypical Jew with an Aryan appearance. In the late 1930s, as the Nazis tightened the screws, his parents sent him to the United States, where he stayed with relatives. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the young man volunteered and returned home as part of the American Army. Here he learned that his younger sister managed to get to Switzerland, where she settled with relatives. But the parents ended up in Auschwitz, where they disappeared, apparently becoming one of the many killed there. In parting, Trist asks Douglas not to be indifferent to evil, because with the tacit consent of such people, all evil happens on Earth. After listening to such a heartfelt speech, the psychiatrist returns to the city. He finds Judge Jackson to give him his notes and observations about Göring. They can help find a Nazi's weak point in order to defeat him in court. The lawyers decide to use the Reichsmarschall's reputation to lure him into a trap and force him to confess to his criminal actions. On the day of Göring's interrogation, Douglas returns to the courtroom, although by law he is not supposed to be there. During arguments before Judge Jackson, the defendant is confident and assertive in his position. He acted exclusively for the benefit of his native country and did not give orders for massacres. Although Göring was the honorary leader of the SS, real power over the units belonged to Heinrich Himmler. He must be held accountable for all the atrocities committed by the SS. Göring argued that the labor camps were created as a measure against the communists so that they would not be defeated by the Nazis. After Hitler came to power, his party ruthlessly crushed its rivals to make Germany great again. To this end, the Nuremberg racial laws were adopted, limiting the rights of Jews. Jackson believed that the final solution to the Jewish question, to which Göring subscribed, involved physical destruction and mass murder. As evidence, the lawyer shows a document signed by the Reichsmarschall himself. However, the accused claims that he personally had their move in mind, and even the interlocutors' check mark in a line in the document confirms this. What Himmler did there is another question. Realizing that his client is avoiding punishment, Pat replaces his American colleague during the interrogation. He remembers that 6 million people were killed in concentration camps over the course of a few years, and then asks, knowing everything he knows now, whether Hermann Göring would have submitted to Hitler. Having failed to betray the Führer, the Reichsmarschall answered in the affirmative and gave the classic Nazi salute. This is enough for those gathered to find him guilty. On September 30th, 1946, in Nuremberg, the verdict was announced on the top of Nazi Germany. Hermann Göring was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. The date of the execution is kept secret to avoid unrest, but it takes place at the same midnight, shortly before the start, with a select group of journalists invited. The prisoners themselves were woken up 15 minutes before the start. However, when Colonel Andrus tells the journalists why they were invited to the gallows room, he is informed that Göring has been found dead in the cell. He took the cyanide from the hidden capsule and extracted it using a trick he learned from Douglas. The execution begins with the next most senior prisoner, the same propagandist Julius Streicher, who wed himself during the execution of the sentence. After returning to America, Douglas Kelly wrote a book about her experiences called 22 Cells at Nuremberg. Advertising on the radio, the psychiatrist admits that he is frightened by the fact that the Nazis have no distinctive sign by which they can be identified. Moreover, Douglas himself is confident that the United States is full of citizens ready to commit such atrocities if they come to power. After these words, he is politely asked to leave the studio. The film ends with a brief historical note about the further fate of the participants in these events. Judge Jackson returned to the Supreme Court, and Douglas's book received no support. The doctor himself was poisoned by cyanide after a long depression.